In a world governed by wolf packs, a powerful leader named Howie is planning to expand his dominance. Meanwhile, a young girl named Lelia, though seemingly fragile, possesses a heart of strength. Her life is about to be turned upside down by Alpha's ambitions. Welcome to the Alpha's Love channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Prologue. No one had ever seen eyes like his. Large and strained, it almost looked as if they would bulge out of the socket and plop onto the ground. Those who had seen him knew what his eyes meant. The more bulged they were, the more he was keeping an eye on everything and anything. It immediately scared anyone into submission. His pack was small. Slowly, member by member, it was growing larger, but something drastic needed to be done. He'd been training them for weeks now, preparing them to recruit more members, whether willingly or by force. He had an army to build, and it would happen one way or another. Today, his pack was planning on attacking the village of the Broken. It wasn't a well-known village, containing maybe 100 wolves total, but it was suitable for his needs. Quickly his pack was upon them, ripping out the hearts of those who opposed him and torturing those who decided to join him. They had to learn who was in charge at some point. All he did was watch as houses were burned, people were brought to their knees, and children were taken into a large military vehicle he'd brought with him. The man began to chuckle as he simply gazed upon the horror that was happening to the village. The air was filled with the piercing screams of women and children, and the stench of red water permeated for miles. They had taken too long. Wrap it up, he sent out to his pack. They all scurried to finish their dues before shifting into their human forms and bowing in front of him. "Let us go," he said aloud to everyone before him, "to expand our hearts, our minds, and our pack. You are loved here." "Yes, Alpha," they chanted in response, cheering a little afterwards. He simply lifted his hand and silence filled the air. The children in the back of the truck huddled together in a mixture of tears, red water, and feces, crying and screaming their little hearts out. The path their lives were on were forever changed by this moment. Everything changed in this moment. Everyone changed in this moment, including the little boy huddled to himself beneath everyone else's feet. Chapter 1. Aunt Johanna. "Did you forget to iron my dress?" Lelia had a recital in just a few hours, and her dress looked like a crumpled up ball of aluminum foil. She would have ironed it herself, but she wasn't allowed near extremely sharp or hot things. She had a habit of find ways to accidentally hurt herself, no matter what object it was. "I haven't forgotten, Lelia. We still have 2 hours. And it takes a half hour to get there, so we should probably do it now." Her aunt had no sense of time or time management whatsoever. Lelia lived with her mother and her aunt, but her mother was far too frail to do anything but sleep. "Wet on, do you dare touch that iron? Lelia, I'll be down in a second." Their house wasn't that big, though the 2 stories made it look massive from the outside. It was a boring beige color, with boring beige shutters on each window that did nothing to hide the amount of sunlight the house got. Lilia's skin was so pale and fragile that if she stood in the window for too long she'd end up sunburnt. That was something she got from her mother. I'm here," Johanna said, coming down the stairs looking like a tornado had gotten a hold of her hair. Hair was something important in Lilia's family, because they all had the same pitch black hair. Johanna had beautiful long, dark hair that was pin, straight when she brushed it. She didn't brush it very often. Lilia's was a little straight, with a few random curls here and there, and her mother, Kate's, was very curly. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "But not quite. Please hurry, Aunt Johanna. We still have to get Mom up and ready. Lelia said softly. Johanna had already begun to iron the soft, white dress when she winced and gave Lelia a sympathetic look. She won't be able to come, Lelia. You know her heart's sensitive. I know, Lelia murmured. I was just hoping she would come. It's been months since she's left her bed. Well, she'll be cheering you on from that bed, Johanna said with a grin. Lelia couldn't fight the grin from her face, and soon enough both women were laughing so hard tears were almost coming out of their eyes. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Go get changed and I'll make you something to eat before we leave, Johanna stated. Lelia nodded and rushed to her room on the second floor to change into her dress, then made her way to her mother's room to say a quick goodbye. Mama, she said softly. A small figure on the bed twisted around in the dimly lit room. Lelia, my love, her mother croaked. Mama, are you losing your voice again? Lelia asked. Her mother had just gotten her voice back last week. Was she getting sick again? I'll call the doctor on the way to the recital. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. No, Lelia, her mother slurred. This is normal. Just focus on your recital. It was hard to focus on anything when her mother was this weak. She had a feeling this wouldn't be an easy performance. I'll try my best. Mama. I'll see you afterwards, Lelia asked. She smoothed her mom's hair down and watched her eyes flicker shut. Of course you will. Now, get going. Kick everyone else's butts for me, her mom said softly. She was falling asleep again. Lelia gave her mom a peck on forehead before leaving the room quietly. Johanna was waiting for her downstairs, a few grilled cheese sandwiches made and her hair brushed. Eat up. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. We've got 15 minutes until we need to leave. Sure enough, 15 minutes later Johanna and Lelia were on their way to the recital hall. It was a small building down the street from the Peck Clinic, and about 5 minutes away from the Peck house. Lelia felt the nerves start to jump through her mind. Take it easy, Johanna soothed. I can read you like a book. It's all right to be a little nervous, but don't let it take over you. You'll do great. They were there in no time, and Lelia took the opportunity to quickly meet her friends backstage so that she could calm down a little. Lelia, they shouted in unison, running to greet her with a hug. Marjorie and Heather were two people she'd become extremely close to in recent years. They understood the struggle with not only her mom but also with herself, and were very excited to see her because they didn't get to visit much. How's your mom? Was the first thing Heather asked Lelia. She rested a hand on Lelia's shoulder and looked at her in concern. Normal. As good as she can be, Lelia answered. Marjorie and Heather nodded their heads at her answer. Still no answers from the Peck doctor? Marjorie asked. Johanna had taken her mother to the Peck doctor when she began to get sick and he'd had no answers. Lelia's body had already started whatever process it was, but instead of growing fragile, Lelia was just prone to almost any and all sickness. No, but I don't want her to focus on that right now. Let's focus on the competition. The other girls nodded in agreement to what Lelia suggested, but their eyes were still filled with worry. She cleared her throat, gave them a small smile, and walked away to get a drink. Instead of making her feel better, they'd only made her more worried. She gulped down water as if she hadn't had it in years, but slowed down when she realized she was going to make herself sick. To be fair, she was already sick with worry, but a gallon of water inside her stomach would only make things worse. How much longer did her mother have before passing? Thinking about it made her body want to shut down. Lelia, you're up, Marjorie shouted. Lelia gave her a small nod, a shaky smile, and a little wave as she made her way to the stage. Lydia was convinced that she wasn't a good singer. She swears her mother walked in and persuaded every single person to come and listen to her wretched voice. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing Clichet's enthusiasm. She was going to quit, but seeing the smiles on her mom's and Johanna's faces made all the nervousness worth it. She'd been practicing for about 2 months now, and was confident she knew the song and the notes, but the nerves confronted her head-on as she entered the stage. 2.5 minutes was all it took for the nerves to be gone. Lots of applause followed her performance. A blush covered her face and probably her entire body when she looked up and her aunt was the only one standing and whistling. Lydia somehow managed to avoid her friends, in fear they'd talk about her mother again, and made her way to the car. She'd somehow beaten her aunt, so she hopped up on the trunk of the car and sat down. She didn't care if she got her dress dirty. She just wanted some peace and quiet. To be fair, she got plenty of that at home, but she didn't want to speak to her friends if they were just going to question her about her mother. Ready to go, Johanna spoke, out of breath and her hair back to its typical frazzled state. Lydia simply nodded her response and stared out the window the entire ride home. Her aunt simply hummed to the music with the windows down as she drove. Fran really only felt safe with her mother and Johanna, one of the few reasons she let Johanna drive her around. Lydia hated cars with a passion, finding them unsafe and useless when you had legs. Unfortunately for her, if she wanted to continue to sing, she couldn't exactly walk in a dress and heels for 30 or so miles. It wasn't even a possibility. You did great. Today. The year. I can't believe no one else stood. Johanna scowled and tightened on the steering wheel until her knuckles were white. You deserved thousands of standing ovations for that performance. Thank you, Lydia responded. She was quiet today, Johanna noted, quieter than usual. Once they got home, everything would be fine. Lydia would curl up with her mum to read then sleep, and Johanna would have to wake them up for a late dinner. When they arrived at the house a few minutes later, Lydia's body tensed at the smell of her alpha. He came here in his free time, which, luckily for her, wasn't that often. Alpha Howie was in his late 30s, and for some reason had his eyes set on Lydia as his mate. She was young, only just turning 20 the month before, and had absolutely no interest in taking a male that wasn't her soulmate. After listening to Kate talk about Lydia's dad, Lydia knew she would accept her mate at all costs. Ben had been younger than Kate, she thought with a grin, but that didn't stop them. Kate's illnesses had also started to get more severe, but that didn't stop Ben. Lydia got to experience life for 7 years with her father before he was brutally taken away from them. A training match had gone too far, and the alpha, Howie's elderly father at the time, wasn't paying attention. An angry pack member had killed my father while practicing, and walked away innocent. It angered my mother so much she got sick again, but this time it would be crippling. Kate lost feeling in her legs when Lydia was 8 years old and had barely left her bed since. The doctors didn't know how she had lasted as long as she did, but Lydia was thankful for every second she got with her mother. Johanna exited the car first. Lydia had her hand on the door handle to get out, but froze when Alpha Howie opened her front door. Johanna stopped and turned back to Lydia, as if to see what she would do. Sometimes Lydia wished her family would take a stand for her, but could also understand why they couldn't. Alpha Howie was kind to them, and if they fought against him more than they already were, then there would be consequences. Major ones that Lydia didn't ever want to face. Lydia, Alpha spoke loudly as soon as she stepped 1 foot outside the car. Her body wanted her to freeze again, but she kept going and tried to avoid his gaze as she stepped past him and into her home. How can we help you? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Johanna asked when they were all sitting around each other at the kitchen table. It was small, and Alpha Howie looked quite funny with his large frame. It made it seem like he was an adult sitting at the kids' table. I'd like to speak with Lydia for a moment. Johanna. Alone. I'm sure her mother needs some attention, he commented. Alpha's eyes never left Lydia's tense figure as he spoke. Johanna sent a glance to Lydia before nodding and standing. She bowed and left quickly, leaving her niece behind with Alpha Howie. How have you been, Lydia? His gentle tone wouldn't fool her. He wasn't here to be nice. What can I do for you? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Lydia avoided his question one purpose. Her plan worked when his eyes flashed with anger and his hands curled into fists. He leaned onto the table so close she could feel his breath on her face. Don't ignore your Alpha. Lydia, you've been taught better than that. Her leg twitched. She wanted nothing more than to slam it between his legs right where he was sitting. I'm fine. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. How are you? Lydia asked through clenched teeth. Alpha Howie smirked and leaned back in his chair. I've been great. Lydia, thank you for asking. The two wolves sat there in silence, listening to the slight ticking sound coming from the clock in the next room. You looked beautiful at your recital today. Lydia, he said with a sickening grin. Lydia gulped. It was getting harder to keep her cool around him. Thank you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Lydia released a loose breath. A disgusting feeling started to fill up her stomach, threatening to release all over the table. She swallowed it down and looked him in the eyes. He had been there watching. If she had known that, he would have ruined the whole night. Yes, she loved singing, but she wasn't afraid to quit if it meant Alpha couldn't see her doing it. Have you thought about my offer? He seemed genuine, which only led to confusion. Yes, she thought about his offer. She had also rejected the same offer 7 times now. This would be the 8th. I'm sorry. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. But do you not remember our conversation from about 3 weeks ago? Lydia had to think back pretty far. She was glad she had too, because it meant he hasn't been here for a while. It was a shame today it was going so wrong. I'm asking if you've thought about my offer. Lydia. I would like it if you answered the question before I get upset. He threatened. She gulped. No, Alpha. I won't be your chosen soulmate, she answered with a sigh. They had been through this so many times before, and the same result came out of every situation. I will ask you one more time. Lydia, the next time I am here, I expect a yes. I wouldn't want to have to resort to drastic measures, would I? His tone was threatening once again, but instead of brushing it off, she felt it slap her in the face. He was going to do it, she thought. He was actually going to do it. He was going to kill her family and torture her until she said yes. She didn't want to believe it, but looking at his face, she could tell it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Chapter 2. There was a definitive difference between the applause she got now and the applause she'd gotten at the show before this one. Lydia's heart just wasn't in it. Once again Johanna stood and let out a loud whistle, waving her hands wildly through the air. Lydia blushed and made her way off stage as quickly as possible. Though she didn't want to go home, she did want to get off the stage. She knew what was waiting for her at home. It had been about 3 weeks so far how he had last visited. It wasn't that long for him, that she had a horrible feeling he'd be waiting for her at the house. She wanted to enjoy her last day of freedom, but had messed up her performance. To her it seemed to be a sign of the bad day to come. Johanna found her backstage after everyone had left. "Lydia, you usually meet me at the car." She sat down next to Lydia on the floor, crossing her legs the same way Lydia had. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," Lydia answered. The hardest part about what she'd have to do at the house would be telling her mother, and he would be accepting Alpha as her soulmate. Just the thought made her shudder and her eyes water. "Is this about your performance?" "You did great." Johanna smiled. Lydia smirked and let hair fall over her face. Her aunt wouldn't have said that in the first place if her performance had been up to par. It was fine. She'd be fine. She didn't want her last moments with her aunt to be spent arguing. "I know. Aunt Johanna. I just want to go home. I lost track of time." Lydia blurted out an excuse. It was believable, apparently, because her aunt stood and held her hand out to help her out. Johanna grunted as she pulled Lydia up to her feet. "You're not as light as you used to be, kid," Johanna laughed. The calm inn turned a small chuckle out of Lydia, but silence ensued as they made their way to the car. Aunt Johanna's car was a little too small for Lydia's legs, but it was all they had. Lydia knew she would miss this when she went with Alpha Howie. "Are you sure everything is all right, Lydia?" Johanna probed. Lydia simply nodded her head. She knew if she told anyone about Alpha Howie's proposition, consequences would come upon the family. She would make it seem like it was her decision and her decision alone. "I'm all right," she assured. She was anything but all right, but her family would always come first. In order for them to live comfortably, she would spend the rest of her life with her Alpha. She gulped. The trip back home seemed faster than ever, she noticed, and found herself frozen to her seat when her aunt put the car in park and opened her door. The Alpha's scent immediately washed through the car. Lydia was dizzy. Could she really do this? She would have to. Lydia. Her aunt linked her. She was watching her from the doorway of the house, her eyebrows flickering back and forth between the car and something inside. Lydia knew exactly what, or rather who it was. She shivered. "I'm coming. To my agent extraordinaire, Myron Noben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "I'll be there in a minute," Lydia whispered back to her through the link. Johanna looked at Lydia in confusion. She really only called her Aunt Johanna auntie when he wanted something. This time, for the first time, Lydia just wanted her aunt. She just wanted to stay. Her eyes watered when Alpha Howie's smell practically consumed her head when she stepped out of the car. Once again her body froze. Alpha Howie had wandered out of the house and pushed her aunt inside before glaring at her so strongly her body began to shake. "Let's go, Lydia," he ordered with a growl. Her body didn't listen to him. It wanted to listen to her heart, to run away and scream for help, but her brain knew that wasn't even an option. Lydia clenched her eyes shut and tried to force herself to accept her new life. Her feet took a step forward, then another, then another. She hesitated in taking the final step that would land her right in front of her future mate. Her wolf was trying to push herself out and show Alpha how wrong this was. Lydia wouldn't let her. "I trust you have an answer for me today, Alpha," Howie prodded, his tone smug. Lydia could see Aunt Johanna in her peripheral vision. She was wringing her hands in nervousness. All Lydia wanted to do was comfort her, but she had a feeling Aunt Johanna would be upset with her after this. Lydia looked him square in the eyes. "I have, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "I accept." A sickening grin grew on his face. He slowly clapped his hands before motioning to her house. "I think you've made the right decision, Lydia. Please, come inside." and we can speak more about this. No, she didn't want him in her house again. Instead of trying to fight the alpha, she simply followed his directions. As much as she didn't want his filth in her house, she had no say in anything she did anymore. Lydia sent a small, sympathetic smile towards Johanna. Her aunt responded with another look, one confusion before following Leah and the alpha into the kitchen. Is there anything I can get you? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Perhaps, Johanna offered. Alpha shook his head. Bring Kate down here, please. Lydia and I need to speak with the both of you. Alpha, Howie requested. He smiled when my hands tightened into fists on the table. Johanna gave Lydia a strange look before standing up and making her way to the stairs. Johanna wasn't all that strong, but Kate was very thin to thin and could be carried by almost everyone. Lydia didn't ask permission before standing and unfolding her mother's wheelchair. Alpha said nothing as she simply put it at the bottom of the stairs and made her way back to the kitchen table. At the last second she diverted towards the kitchen sink. She grabbed a cup and quickly filled it with water before sitting back down. Alpha Howie's eyes never left her. Even when they heard Johanna descend the stairs and set Kate in the wheelchair, Lydia's eyes never left her cup and Alpha's never left her. She shivered. When had it gotten so cold in here? Kate's scent drifted into Lydia's nose as Johanna pushed her up to the table. Lydia smiled and reached over to grab her mother's hands. They were small and cold, like they always were, but they brought Lydia an unbelievable amount of comfort. Now that you're both here, we have something we'd like to tell you. Alpha Howie crooned, motioning to Lydia to continue. She felt as if when she opened her mouth, bile would come out instead of words. She kept her jaw clenched shut. Lydia, don't you want to tell them, or should I do the honors? Oddly, Lydia thought she would prefer it if he broke the news. Maybe then Johanna and her mother wouldn't be upset with her. This is a special moment with your family, Alpha murmured. His grin was disappearing. I think you should tell them, Lydia. After he finished his sentence, Lydia felt his foot nudge her leg. She was going to be sick. We're mating, she choked out. Alpha Howie asked me to be his chosen mate and I accepted. Johanna and her mother's faces were so aghast Lydia was afraid one or maybe both of them would pass out. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, came her aunt's incredulous whisper. Eyes wide she moved her head back and forth between Alpha Howie and her niece. Are you serious? Would I ever joke about this? Alpha snapped in response. Johanna shrunk back in her seat a little. Lydia's mother squeezed her hands before letting them go. I can't let you do that. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I'm sorry, her mother commented. Lydia leapt from her chair. This was my decision. Mum, not his. Lydia voiced as loud as she could. She wouldn't let her mother even try to fight the alpha off. It wouldn't do anything but bring them harm, and Lydia wasn't going to be responsible for it. You're sure? Kate asked. Lydia turned towards her mother, sat down, and nodded vehemently. I'm positive, she panted. Now she was hot and she could feel sweat dribbling down her forehead. She wiped it off and sat back down. Her tailbone felt the pain of sitting down to fastened in a weird position, but she focused on the situation at hand. Alpha's eyes still hadn't left her body. I'd like her things to be packed by tonight, he insisted. Lydia could only watch as her aunt and mother simply nodded. Alpha Howie grinned a smug grin, staring right into Lydia's eyes. She'll be moving in with me tomorrow. Yes, Alpha, Lilia answered before her family could say anything else. Alpha's eyes grew distant, a sign he was being mined, linked by someone. Then he stood. He reached a hand out to Lilia, who had no choice but to place a hand in his. He let his lips touch it in a small kiss before dropping it. Lilia wanted to chop her hand off. I'll have to take my leave now. There's been an attack at the eastern border, so make sure you put the house on lockdown, he instructed. Lilia nodded. They all watched him leave. Then Lilia and Johanna set to work clocking down the house. Every house in the pack was required to have a lockdown feature, which consisted of metal shutters going over every single window and door in the house. It was a lot of work, so Lilia was practically dripping with sweat by the time she was finished. She was terrified to face her family's questions. Lilia, don't you even dare think about packing, Aunt Johanna fumed. You won't do anything until you explain this to us. Kate's head nodded slightly and Lilia knew she had to find a way around this. I've explained everything, and I've made my decision. You can't stop me, Lilia shrieked. A piece of her hair fell into her, and she blew it away with a quick breath. She didn't want her family to hate her, but if that was what it took for them to believe her, she would do what she had to do. You were so excited for your mate, Kate faltered. I don't understand what's changed. I don't want to wait forever, Lilia lied. I love him. Goodness, how those words triggered the bile in her stomach. She pushed it down. You can tell us if something is wrong, Lilia. He's been visiting the house a lot and asks to speak with you alone. I knew something was off about that. Johanna remembered. She was never allowed to be in the room with Lilia. I would tell you if something is wrong. To my agent extraordinaire, Myelin Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. So don't worry. Will you come help me pack my things? Lilia questioned. Neither of her family members moved. He's forcing you, isn't he? Alpha is forcing you to choose him as a mate. What is he threatening you with? Johanna fretted. Lilia couldn't stop the tears that began to stream down her cheeks. Kate broke out in sobs as well while Johanna jumped to her feet and grabbed her niece in a hug. We can fix this. Lilia, you just have to be honest. I can't, Lilia whispered defeated lie. She would die before that horrendous Alpha laid his hands on her family. You can, Johanna whispered back. We're grown women. Lilia, we can handle ourselves. I don't want to, Lilia finally wailed, her emotions taking full control of her body. Johanna quickly shushed her as Kate's sobs grew louder. Lilia broke from Johanna's grip and climbed into her mother's lap. I'm sorry, Mama, but I can't let him do anything to you guys. You won't be doing anything, Lilia, except staying here, her mother argued. Tears were still falling, but her face had taken on a tough demeanor. She'll have to go with him for now, Johanna commented, until we can figure out a way to get her out of here. I don't want her to go anywhere near that foul man, Kate murmured. Her throat clenched almost completely shut when she thought about her daughter alone with that man. It's not happening. Listen, members of June Pack. It was the man himself. Mind, linking everyone in the pack for an announcement. Lilia felt a sick shudder of sadness run through her because Alpha Harry hadn't died in the attack. The tears in the room subsided as they all listened to the announcement with rapt attention. We were attacked by the vile rogue pact that has been attacking other packs in our nation. We won. Howls of triumph rang throughout the pack for almost every wolf to hear. Lilia wanted nothing more than for time to reverse and for her pack to lose the battle. It would have been best for everyone. In winning, we have also captured the lead fighter and will be holding a special auction of sorts. Packs from around the world will come and bid on one of the best fighters in history. Once again, howls filtered through the air. Lilia looked to her mother and Johanna, who also wore looks of confusion on their faces. What was Alpha doing? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. They'd never heard of auctioning off one of their own. What is he doing? Johanna whispered vehemently. That man is very, very sick. Every member of the June pack will be required to come to the auction in support of their alpha and the fighters who have captured the beast. Johanna groaned when the link was done. She began to rub her forehead as she turned to her sister. I'm going to have to shift. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I'm sorry, she apologized. Shifting meant tying Kate to her back and running to the arena. Kate shook her head. Belia. The alpha's voice boomed in her head so loudly she grabbed it with a wince. Johanna was immediately at her side. There will be a slight change of plans. I'll allow you one more day with your family while I get this auction settled. Then you will be mine. Do you understand? Lelia gulped, clenched her eyes shut, then nodded. Yes, Alpha. Chapter 3. Lelia didn't bother ironing her dress this time. She would have to carry it in her mouth as they ran to the arena, so it would get wrinkled anyway. She also didn't want to look good to her new mate. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Maybe he would eventually lose interest in her. Belia, are you ready? I've got your mother downstairs. Lelia had rarely ever seen her Aunt Johanna as mad as she had been the day before. Once her family worked out what Alpha was forcing her to do, Lelia had to practically tie down her aunt so she wouldn't go after him. Kate just sat and watched quietly. After Johanna had gone to bed, Lelia crawled into her mother's bed. Kate was still awake and was silently crying when her daughter lifted up the covers and snuggled with her. I can't save you, Kate cried. She hugged her daughter tightly and prayed to the moon goddess her daughter wouldn't be taken from her. Lelia deserved to be happy, and neither of them could understand why this was happening to her. I'll be all right. Mama, just trust me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Lelia was holding back tears. She didn't want to leave, because she wanted to spend with her mother before she died. Her mother's doctor had made it very clear she most likely wouldn't make it to Christmas. It was February. Kate had less than a year left. Lelia closed her eyes and poured as much trust into the moon goddess as she possibly could. Though it was difficult because she didn't like what the goddess was doing, she believed that everything happened for a reason, and somehow this situation would turn around. If she didn't believe that, she would probably lose her mind. Alpha Howie was a dreadful man, but she would deal with it for the time being. Lelia. Her aunt's shrill voice echoed through her head. We're going to be late. Lelia really didn't want to go. Lelia shook her head as she made her way downstairs and towards the front door. Family comes first, she reminded herself, and what she wanted didn't matter right now. Lelia trusted the moon goddess to take care of her needs. I'm here, she assured her family. Johanna scoffed and lifted Kate off of the couch. Lelia's aunt began to slip out of her clothes before shifting. She was supposed to be used to seeing people in the nude, but no matter how she looked at it, she was embarrassed every time. Lelia quickly took her dress and undergarments off and placed them in a small bag before shifting. Her wolf was smaller than the average size in her pack, but Lelia had done amazing in training. It seemed like the illnesses she got from her mother didn't affect her in wolf form. Help your mother up, then we'll go, Johanna said. Lelia slid her head under her mother's legs as she grabbed onto Johanna with her arms. A quick count to 3 and Kate was settled on Johanna's large wolf form. Then they were off. The journey to the arena wasn't typically too long, but Lelia felt like it went too fast this time. She didn't want to see Alpha Howie, and she really didn't want to see them auction off one of their own kind. Yes, the wolf had done something wrong. But wasn't this going too far? The person who bought the wolf would probably just be using it as target practice. She didn't want to see that happen. Just as she'd thought, the journey was way too short. Lydia could hear the crowd before she saw them, but as they came into view her stomach began to churn. There were so many people, definitely more than she had originally thought. She could smell 3 now, for Elphys, and her wolf just wanted to turn around and run back to the house. There's an open spot over here. Lydia, hurry and help your mother down, Johanna requested. Lydia trotted over to where Johanna was standing. She felt her mother's arms wrap around her neck and tighten when her legs slipped off her sister. Johanna was quick to dress herself before lifting Kate away from Lydia's body. I've got her, Johanna assured. Go ahead and change. Lydia looked at all of the males around her and felt her wolf whining in embarrassment. Hurry, Johanna snapped. I need help finding a chair for your mother. To get it over with as quickly as possible, she shifted and yanked on her white dress. It had a small dirt smudge on the bottom, but at least it was covering her body. She slipped other undergarment as inconspicuously as possible, but it hadn't worked. She tried her best to ignore the snickers behind her and feign looking for a chair. Leah, go walk around and look for a chair, please. Her aunt sounded desperate for help as she fretted around Kate. Lydia's mother wasn't usually allowed outdoors because she gets sick easier outside. Alpha Howie knew Leah wouldn't like it. She felt her anger towards the man grow. Lydia made her way towards Alpha Howie with her jaw clenched. He was talking with 2 other men, one of them Elphys, and Lydia practically cowered at the thought of talking to strangers. Alpha Howie, she chimed in when there was a lull in conversation. Alpha looked over at her with a smirk. He allowed his eyes to slowly move up and down her body and she shivered in disgust. How may I help you, my love? Her wolf tried to take over immediately, but she held back. She knew he called her that to show his power over her, and it was working. Lydia wanted to curl up into a ball and allows the hidden tears to run free. I need a chair for my mother, she whispered. Alpha smirked at her reaction and shook his head. We don't have any chairs here, sweetheart. Your mother will just have to sit on the ground for the time being. Lydia's fists clenched, but she kept her mouth shut. She nodded and made her way back to her family as quick as possible. Johanna sent her a questioning look and Lydia responded with a quick nod. Her aunt muttered curses under her breath and her eyes wandered around the arena. She growled when she found Alpha Howie. It's not worth it, Aunt Johanna. We're not going to be here long anyways, Lydia assured. Her aunt growled again. Fine, Johanna snarled. Lydia let her eyes roam over the crowd. There were more and more people arriving every second, and Lydia could practically feel the crowd closing in on her. A few minutes later the crowd grew silent as Alpha Howie took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Alpha exclaimed. He looked visibly excited and waved his hands when he spoke. Today, we have a big treat for you all. Lydia shivered, so Johanna wrapped an arm around her. You'll be all right, Lydia. We'll leave soon. Tu es agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Johanna murmured quietly. Lydia nodded and lowered her eyes to the floor. Let's bring him out, Alpha Howie announced. Gasps of pleasure and surrounded Lydia. The only thing she felt was disgust. These people were going to pay money for another wolf. This whole thing was wrong in so many ways, she thought. An immense pain-filled roar echoed throughout the air. It caused both Lydia and her mother, who weren't looking straight at him, to jump. Lydia shivered and Johanna tightened her grip. After a few moments of silence to allow the murmurs to dissipate, Lydia felt she had enough courage to look up at the wolf. He was horrifying, There were spots where his fur was just. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Like it had been yanked out his body. Swabber flew back and forth as he threw his head from side to side, anxiously pacing to get out of the cage. He was the biggest thing the crowd had ever seen. The cage was on top of a rolling platform that moved slightly every time he moved to one side of the cage. Thick metal bars held him from devouring the crowd in mere seconds, and Lydia found herself wondering if they could really hold that wolf back. She'd never seen a more muscular wolf in her life, and wondered what he ate to become like that. Lydia and her mother could surely use whatever he was using. Alpha Howie looked unbelievably pleased as he stared at the pacing wolf. She could feel her anger rising at the sickening grin slowly taking over her Alpha's face. The men and women surrounding her plugged their noses or waved their hands in front of their faces. When Johanna and Kate began to do the same, Lydia turned towards them in confusion. "Do you not smell that?" Johanna wondered. "It smells like he's rotting." As Lydia took a big, deep sniff, she realized she couldn't smell anything but pine trees and honey. She turned to her aunt. "All I smell is pine trees, honey, and maybe a dead rabbit a few miles away. What are you guys smelling?" Johanna's eyes widened and she turned to Kate in surprise. "Johanna will take you to the doctor tomorrow. Lydia, it could be an illness affecting your sense of smell," her mother insisted. Lydia tried to ignore what she said afterwards. "It's probably not good," Johanna whispered to Kate with a wince. Lydia focused her attention back at the wolf in front of the crowd. His pacing had increased in speed, indicating just how agitated he was. Lydia wouldn't like being stared at like a zoo animal either. Who would? "Let's start the bidding at $3 million. Lydia jumped when Alpha Howie's loud voice echoed throughout the arena. Almost everyone's hands raised. Lydia was sick to her stomach. Alpha Howie seemed to purposefully be moving the amount up slowly, as to make the evening last longer. If Lydia had known it was going to take this long, she would have brought a meal for her family. Her mother must be starved right now. Everyone's attention snapped to the wolf as it stopped pacing and stood frozen. The crowd hushed and watched as not a single muscle in the wolf's body even twitched. Alpha Howie walked up to the cage with a snarl. Interrupting me, she could hear him mutter, "Hey!" Alpha Howie shouted. Soon after that his boot connected with the metal bars of the cage. It caused a loud ringing that forced several people, including Leah and her family, to cover their ears with their hands. It didn't help. The wolf's head snapped towards Alpha and growled a warning towards him. Alpha Howie smirked and turned back to the crowd. 9 million. The same amount of hands went up and Leah's shoulders drooped. This was going to take forever. The wolf still stood stark still, but his muscles had tensed. Lydia found herself inching closer to her family. She would shift if she needed to protect them. Why was the entire pack required to come? Members of other packs were bidding, but Lydia's pack looked either bored or horrified. She just wanted to go home. Gasp filled the crowd as the wolf stared straight into the crowd and snarled. Some people dropped to their knees in submission, while others tried to challenge the wolf and stare straight into his eyes. No one would win the challenge, however, because his eyes were flickering over each person. Even Alpha Howie had stopped to watch curiously. He took a step away from the cage and the crowd waited to see what the wolf would do next. His eyes neared Lydia's and she panicked. What was she supposed to do? Before she could think of a way out, his eyes made eye contact with hers. It was like she hadn't known something was missing, but as soon as they locked eyes, it was like the final puzzle piece snapping into place. She was complete. Soulmate, her wolf whispered. Her muscles tightened and she fought the urge to flee. She yelled before her brain could stop her. She could faintly hear Johanna gasp over the ringing in her ears. Every pair of eyes in the crowd and on the stage turned to face her. She noticed Alpha Howie growl at her, then smile. She shivered but kept her eyes on her mate. His eyes hadn't left hers either. "Come up here," Alpha's voice boomed. Lily turned to her mother and her aunt. "Take care of Mother," she told Johanna. Lily knelt down next to her mother and pulled her into a hug. "This is my way out, Mama. I'm gonna take it," she promised. Lily had a plan. She made her way towards the stage, ignoring her aunt reaching for her and all the whispers surrounding her as she walked. Lydia could feel the wolf's eyes, stood on her and fought to keep a smile on her face. She sent a quick prayer to the goddess before standing in front of Howie on the stage. "How dare you interrupt your Alpha, Lydia?" Alpha Howie thundered. "As a punishment, you'll kneel facing the audience for the rest of the auction." Lydia trembled from the power of his voice, but followed directions. Her knees began to hurt as soon as they touched the cold metal stage. 13 million. Alpha Howie announced. Lydia began to shiver. Some of the people in the crowd were still staring at her. Johanna was crying. Lydia tried not to look. A gasp echoed throughout the crowd. Lydia looked to her left to see the wolf throwing itself against the side of the cage. Alpha Howie took a step back and guard stepped in front of him, ready to get involved if necessary. Once again the wolf's eyes never left hers as he threw himself against the bars again and again. Alpha Howie, realizing what was happening wasn't a part of Lydia's plan. A quick glance between Lydia and the wolf was all it took for him to make the connection. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a surprise guest," Alpha announced. His men stepped to the side as he stood forward and yanked Lydia by her armpit. She let out a startled yelp and could only watch with wide eyes as the wolf let out a wild roar. "This will make things very interesting. Whoever decides to bid on the wolf will have the pleasure of taking him away from his mate. This will surely double no, triple his pain. Revenge is sweet," Alpha chuckled. Lydia grew sick to her stomach when the crowd laughed with him. No, this wasn't going according to plan. The wolf was now pulling at the bars as hard as he could. Growls were emitting from him, louder with each pull, but it didn't seem like it was going anywhere. Lydia made eye contact with the teary Johanna and gave her a small smile. "I'll be all right," she murmured through the link before closing her end of it. She needed to focus on the matter at hand. A loud, piercing noise echoed throughout the arena. It made almost all the crowd drop to the ground, groaning and gripping their heads tightly. Lydia looked to her right to see the wolf had pulled one of the bars completely out of the cage, but he was nowhere close to fitting through the gap. He began to yank at another bar as guards inched closer to the cage. They couldn't really do anything to stop him, and they were trying to somehow calm him down. It wasn't working. "Hurry," Lydia screamed. The wolf let out a loud snarl before pulling another bar clear out of the cage. Alpha Howie had to duck to keep the bar from piercing straight through his skull. Timur! He needed Timur to get out. Alpha Howie pulled her close to his chest and wrapped an arm around her neck. It tightened and he ignored Lydia when she began to smack his arm. She wasn't getting any air. "Stop it. Now or she'll die," Alpha threatened. Instead of stopping, this made the wolf move faster. Another bar clunk head out of his way. One law. Alpha Howie's grip tightened. Black dots swarmed Lydia's eyes. She gasped for breath, her hits lessening more and more. She whimpered. Ugh. He was free. Chapter 4. As soon as the wolf stepped out of the cage, he released an ear, piercing snarl that caused many to scream out in pain. Lydia, however, remained unaffected. Her eyes stayed on the wolf, his back arched and his fur standing straight up. She felt shivers run down her spine when he turned and made eye contact with her. It seemed like time had stood still. Everyone was still on the ground clutching their ears, including her Alpha and her family. Lydia was saddened that her mother and aunt had to go through this, but they would be all right. Her plan would follow through. When Lydia first noticed the wolf was her mate, fear froze her body. She couldn't do anything but stare at him until a plan formed in her head. A plan to escape her chosen mate. If Lydia somehow was able to let the wolf escape, he would hopefully take her and run far, far away. Alpha Howie couldn't blame Lydia or her family because leaving had been against Lydia's will. That was her plan. It would save both her and her family. There were a few setbacks, but everything would be all right now, or so she hoped. The wolf took one step towards her, then two, then three, until it was sprinting full speed toward her body. That was when fear froze her body again. She really hadn't thought this through. This wolf was a killing machine, and Lydia hadn't thought about literally dying. All of this fear ran through her so quickly she almost passed out. Yet at the same time, she felt oddly at peace. When Lydia focused her eyes on the wolf, her mind and body calmed down abruptly. Her body swayed and she fell to the ground just in time for the wolf to run underneath her. His large, muscular form lifted her off the ground and sprinted away as fast as he could. Lydia was so full of relief and relaxation she could have laughed. She knew this wasn't the time for it, so she held back. The wolf's muscles looked hard on the outside, but, as Lydia was finding out, he was actually very soft. The only reminder she had of him running was the wind violently ripped her hair back and forth. "Stop then, Skitty Ralpha," Howie bellowed. The thundering of paws surrounded her, but she wasn't worried. She trusted her mate to get her out of here. It was her only option. "You'll never get away," he seethed in her head. Her body tensed and she could tell her soulmate felt it, because he released a roar that she was sure shook the trees around them. The wolves from her pack fell back a little bit, but were soon trying to catch up. Lydia ran her hand down her mate's side to calm him down a little. "Get us out of here," she whispered frantically now. She didn't think her mate could run any faster. She was just trying to be supportive while lying limp on his back, but the surface of his back got harder, and soon she felt like she was flying. The sound of footsteps fell behind them until a few minutes later, they completely faded away. "Thank you," Lydia panted. She was exhausted despite not doing any of the work her mate was doing. The border came into view, and Lydia tried to twist and turn until she was straddling her mate's back. He released a purr that didn't match his stature, and she found herself laughing. Worry came to her slightly when her mate didn't even slow down. He burst across the border, whipping the bond to her pack from Lydia's chest without a backwards glance. She gasped for breath, clutching the wolf's fur tightly. Her mate slowed down considerably once her pack's border was out of sight, but he was still going faster than she liked. A simple tap to his back brought him to a screeching halt. If Lydia hadn't been gripping his fur so tightly, she was sure she would have flown right over his head. She slid down from his back with a gulp and tried to straighten out her dirty dress as much as she could. She was so proud of herself when she didn't iron her white dress this morning, but now she was wishing she had. This was her real soulmate, and the wind and the dirt hadn't done her any favors. She blushed and smoothed her hair down the best she could. Her mate circled her as she tried to fix her appearance, his eyes dragging up and down her body. It was as if she could feel his hand against her skin wherever his eyes landed, so she plopped down into a sitting position to cover herself more. It didn't work. The wolf allowed his eyes a few more moments, staring at the strange creature before going back to circling her. This time, his eyes were anywhere but her. Lydia could tell he was on full alert, ready to attack anyone or anything that dared come near them. She shivered. "Hello," Lydia's voice squeaked. She visibly winced when her voice cracked in the middle of her question. Her mate was suddenly in her face and moving around her body, sniffing for any possible injuries. She could feel her cheeks heat up as his nose brushed her thigh and moved her dress slightly. Can you shift back?" Why was she stuttering? This was her soulmate. She shouldn't be nervous. He would protect her and cherish her. The wolf shook its head and moved in circles around her once again. What? He couldn't shift back. Lydia felt her breathing quicken. Is everything okay? Are you hurt? She felt ashamed that wasn't her first question. He had probably been tortured while trapped in her back. Eden thought it was only for a night. He nodded and continued to pace. So you can understand me, she verified. The wolf nodded once more. She shivered again. They needed to find somewhere to stay for the night, because the sun was going to go down soon and it was already almost dark. She didn't do well in the cold. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. First, we need to find shelter. Do you? She trailed off when he made eye contact with her. She shivered again, but this time it wasn't because of the weather. Her mate was so intimidating. Do you have a home? Or I heard you might have a pack, Nadia asked tentatively. The wolf nodded, paused, nodded again, then shook his head. Lydia furrowed her eyebrows. She'd only asked 3 questions. Okay, so, you have a home? She verified. He nodded. Do you have a pack? He nodded again. What was the no for? She muttered to herself. He huffed and stomped a foot before pacing around her again. He was making her dizzy. We can't go back, she guessed. He looked surprised, but nodded. Why couldn't they go back? Why not? He didn't even bother to try to answer. She blushed. Obviously he can't answer in wolf form. Lydia sighed. Were you kicked out? He shook his head. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. We just need to find shelter for now. Even as she spoke, the wind picked up slightly. It prickled at her skin, causing her to wince, which in turn caused her mate to growl lowly. She wrapped her arms around herself and gave him a small smile. He seemed to get the message and searched around the surrounding area for something that could be used as shelter. She rubbed her forearms and coughed lightly. The wolf returned and didn't hesitate before nudging himself under her again. She let herself be lifted air and tight and the small grip she had on him. He was warm. Her mate was slower this time, jogging to a small cave a couple 100 yards away. Lydia wasn't wearing any shoes, so when she was set down on the cold floor her entire body shivered, practically convulsing on the floor. The wolf left and came back quickly, a small rabbit in his mouth. He dropped it in front of her with a splat. A few drops of red water landed on the bottom of her dress, but she really didn't care right now. She just wanted to be warm. Lydia coughed again. This time it was louder and lasted longer, and her mate watched on in concern. She really couldn't get sick if there wasn't a doctor nearby. Lydia needed to shift into her wolf. Though it wouldn't help her health, it would make her slightly warmer. It would also make her feel better about eating the rabbit. She began to slip off her dress until she realized he was still watching. Blushing, she motioned for him to turn around so she could shift. He cocked his head to one side in confusion and she sighed in response. Her legs shook when she stood and pushed him until he was facing away from her. Stay, she commanded. He sat down on the ground with a huff. She pulled her dress off quickly, shivering when the cold air reached every part of her body. She quickly shifted into her small wolf, then nudged her mate's back leg. He jumped, skidding a little towards the entrance of the cave, and his eyes widened when he finally saw the size of her wolf. She looked like a pup. How old was this girl? Lydia tentatively walked up to the rabbit. She sniffed quickly before taking a small bite. Her mate sighed and began to softly pull the carcass into small pieces for her to eat quicker. Lydia laid down and relaxed as she ate, relishing in the presence of her mate. He walked outside for a little before coming back and then curling around her. Warmth filled her body and she could feel the stress and cold seeping out of her bones. He began to groom her head while she was eating, and she couldn't imagine a time she was happier than this. She knew they had a tough road ahead of them, but he already meant so much to her. Lydia thought she had been happy her whole life, but she'd just been surviving. Just living while others were living their lives to the fullest. Her mate groomed her as she ate, and she couldn't have imagined an evening like this when she first met him. This was perfect. So far. Chapter 5. Lydia didn't remember finishing the rabbit. When she woke, her stomach was full and there were bones on the ground, which probably meant she'd eaten the rabbit completely before passing out from exhaustion. Her mate was sleeping behind her, and to her relief she was no longer cold. Instead of being cold, she was scalding. The part of her body touching her mate was sweating immensely. She winced and peeled her body from his. The wolf awoke immediately and growled at the movement at the front of the cave. Lydia's wolf form froze at her mate's growl, thinking there was danger nearby. When he noticed it was only her, he relaxed. She made her way towards the wolf, rubbing up against its side until she finally settled beside it again. Lydia began to groom him to return the favor of last night, and the wolf simply laid back and relaxed. Lydia felt honored that her mate would be so relaxed in her presence. It was warm out, she noticed, so she entered the depths of the cave once again and made her way to where her dress was laying on the ground. One glance at her mate was all it took for him to turn around and give Lydia privacy. She couldn't help but grin once in her human form. After sliding the dress on, she tapped him on the head slightly. He turned to face her. That didn't move. She frowned and motioned towards the entrance of the cave. The wolf simply blinked at her. Lydia wanted him to shift. Could you shift back? She sputtered nervously. She had asked the wolf this question already, but was yearning for a different answer. The wolf shook his head. Lydia huffed and looked at her surroundings. You can understand me. A part of her was beginning to doubt a wolf was ever even part human. She shuddered at the thought of having a mate with no human side. The wolf nodded back at her. He cocked his head in confusion, looking her up and down, and she wondered what he could possibly be thinking about her. Would he be pleased? How would she ever know? Her mate stalked past her and towards the entrance of the cave. She followed him, curious to where they would go next, before stopping just short of his tail. He had sat down again. She refrained from muttering a curse and moved to stand in front of him. What are we waiting for? She realized with disdain that he was a member of the pack that had been attacking other packs, but maybe they had a reason for it. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't as evil as everyone made them out to be. She hoped. The wolf ignored her and continued to look around. The area outside the cave they had stayed in was very rocky. Multiple caves and large, natural rock structures surrounded them. Entranced by her mate the night before, Lydia must not have realized how daunting the area was. She was warm, yet her surroundings sent a shiver down her spine. She wasn't so sure she wanted to leave the cave now. Her mate had other plans. He stood on all four legs and used his large head to push her towards his left hind leg. She got the message and swung the leg over his back to straddle him before he began to run. The wolf was extremely watchful as he exited the cave and began to dash on the gravel, like rocks, then through thick foliage. Lydia whimpered and questioned her choice to shift into her human form when she felt thin, prickly branches slamming into her limbs. Her mate came to an almost complete stop when he heard her small cry. He quickly steered her off of his back and stood on his two hind legs. She could only watch it all as he began to walk on his back legs and wrap his paws around her. Shielding her, Lydia's mate quickly made his way through the vegetation and she couldn't feel a single thing. He had been surprising her every second since she'd met him. She felt lucky, but at the same time, and sure, Lydia had many, Many questions for him, and it was worrying her that he couldn't answer any of them. Lydia couldn't hold back her gasp when she saw what awaited them outside of the thick leaves and vines. There weren't views like this in her old pack. In front of Lydia and her mate was the most beautiful lake she had ever seen. It was surrounded by lush flowers and big, wide trees that were possibly the tallest she'd ever seen. The water was so clear she could almost see the very bottom of the lake and resisted jumping in. She felt dirty, and the dirt and red water on her dress weren't exactly helping. Mistaking her gasp of awe for one of fear, her mate leapt in front of her and let out a roar similar to the one he had released in the cage. She shivered as every single animal, bird, and insect trushed away from the lake. The fish probably wanted to get away too, she thought, but they had nowhere else to go. Lydia thumped her mate on the head, causing him to turn to her with an incredulous look. She shrugged. Her mate nodded his head towards the lake. What did he want her to do? Did he want her to jump in the lake? His pulse struck the ground in frustration. It's hard to know what you want me to do when you can't talk, Lydia snapped. The wolf's head dipped in apology before nodding towards the lake once again. She tried not to growl. Assuming he wanted her to swim in the lake, she walked behind him and stripped before slowly entering the lake. She regretted it instantly. Her weak immune system flinched at the feeling of cold water surrounding her body. Though she shouldn't have even touched a toe in the water, it felt good to clean her body. It hadn't been that long since she left, but if she wallowed in filth for too long she would get seriously ill. Lydia wondered how sick she would get from the temperature of the water. Splashing behind her caused her to turn around quickly. She thought another creature might have gotten in the water with her, possibly her mate, and turned to yell but stopped in her tracks. The wolf had taken her dress in its teeth and was dunking it underwater. He was trying to clean her dress but splashing it through the water, and Lydia was having a hard time not giggling. "Turn around," she requested. Lydia's entire body was shivering and her lips were turning a faint blue color. Her mate followed directions, allowing her to exit the lake and shift into her wolf form. She couldn't possibly put on her wet dress right now. She took it from her mate and draped it over a small tree trunk resting on the ground. Her mate was quick to wrap his body around hers when she shivered again. She relished in his warmth and doubted she would ever be able to get up again. She wished they were in the safety of a pack so she could relax fully, but understood that they might have quite a bit more traveling to do. After about 30 minutes she reluctantly stood and walked a few paces away from her mate. He stood as well, curious as to where his mate was going. He watched her shiver as she walked over to her dress and nudged it with her nose. When she turned to him with an expectant look in her eyes, he turned around. "How much further do we have to go?" Lydia questioned. She turned to him for an answer before wanting to smack herself for forgetting he literally couldn't answer. She almost growled out of frustration. She watched her mate lift his front right, paw up and make a circular motion, stop for a moment, then continue. She really hated playing the guessing game, but it was all she had. "We're going to continue for a long time." The wolf looked frustrated and huffed a little before explaining his answer once again. This time, when he paused his motions, he pointed to the sky. She looked up and closed her eyes when it got too bright. "The sun. We're only going to walk for today." Her mate stood and paced back and forth, trying to figure out how to explain it. It was unbelievably frustrating to both of them to not be able to speak through the mind link, but they would have to be mated for that to happen. He would need to shift, and it looked like that wasn't happening anytime soon. Her mate moved through his motions once again, except pointing at the sun. He laid down and closed his eyes. Was he trying to symbolize nighttime? "We're going to keep walking, Sabe, then keep walking," she guessed. Lydia let out a shriek when the wolf moved towards her so fast she could barely see him. Within one blink her mate had tackled her to the ground and was licking all over her face. She assumed she had guessed right. Tu es agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbert. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Tu es agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbert. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I get it, she yelled with a giggle. Her mate stopped at the sound. Curious as to what it was, she smiled at him. Let's get going. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbert. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I don't know how much longer I can last without getting sick. Her mate's eyes flashed with something she had never seen before, lowering his body so she could climb on. As soon as her chest, his back and her hands gripped his fur, Lilia's mate took off. She shivered as the cool wind passed her and wondered exactly how far they would be traveling. From her point of view, her mate was the fastest wolf she had ever seen. But a trip this long. They had to be crossing the entire country. She felt wary being so far from the home she grew up in, but she knew Aunt Johanna would take care of her mother. Lydia had a new home to worry about now. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.